People who have been straight up fired on the spot. What happened? I handed my boss my 2-week notice and she ripped it in half and said, "Don't bother, you're done today." HQ wasn't too thrilled with her decision as they had to pay me a severance because of her hatred towards me. Commenter: I once had the exact opposite happen. I submitted my resignation and my boss refused it. The next day, I received a meeting invite from my VP on my client's site. Very rare for him to come to me. And when I walked in, the vice president, HR, senior manager, and manager were on one side of a long table, and there was one chair on the other side for me. They insisted that despite my moving 2 states away, we would make it work. It was awkward, as I didn't particularly like working from home. I'm a social creature, and if left at home alone, I will play video games all day. But we made it work for another year before we amicably ended my employment. Story 2. I was working for a small family-owned restaurant. All the waitstaff and most of the kitchen staff was family or friends with the owner. I was hired as a waitress, and I did okay. Not great, not terrible. It was my first time being a waitress. One day, one of their regular customers came in, who is a bit of a local celebrity. He apparently came in once or twice a week and tipped very well. Normally, the owner's daughter would take the table, but she was out sick, so I took them. I got an amazing tip from him, and he told the owner that he would like me to wait on them if I'm available in the future. The second he left, I was fired. Story 3. I was 15 years old, I think. I was a lifeguard at a subdivision pool. Being the new guy and the young kid, I worked every weekend. Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday day. I had already missed going to my grandparents a couple of times, and my parents were taking a vacation. I asked off and was told that I couldn't go. My dad basically said, "You are going? I don't care." I told the boss this, and she said, "You still have to work." I left with my parents, and when I got back, there were a dozen messages on my parents' answering machine saying that they couldn't open the pool because I wasn't there. She fired me 3 or 4 times that weekend. She was a bored housewife, hired by the HOA to schedule the lifeguards who were mostly high school kids. She fired another for wearing a bikini. They didn't use her the next year, but by that point in time, I was 16 and had a better job. Story 4. Worked at a call center. Telemarketing. It was my grandmother's birthday. We didn't hit sales quota for the day. The boss told me I had to stay until we hit. I told him family was more important. Got fired immediately. Best decision ever. Story 5. Me and my friend were 2 young Irish lads working on rebuilding the Canary Wharf Tower in London, which had been blown up by some other Irish lads a year earlier. But that's another story. It was like the Nakatani Plaza. There were so many floors. If you didn't feel like working, you could just go to some random floor and hide out for a while. So, me and my friend, both 18 years old, were hungover one morning. We went to the 23rd floor where there was a comfortable couch, and we lay there smoking substances. Suddenly, the English foreman appears and fires us on the spot. As he was walking away, he says, "That was taking the piss, lads." Unfortunately, there was somewhat of a misunderstanding here. What he meant was that our behavior was so bad, we had crossed a line. However, in Ireland, at that time, that was taking the piss meant I'm only joking. So we continued working for another 3 or 4 hours before he came back and said, "I fired you this morning. What are you still doing here?" Story 6. I came back to my summer job at an amusement park from missing 3 days with strep throat, handed in my doctor's excuse, and was fired for missing work. Apparently, to call off, you couldn't just talk to a manager. You had to talk to the department head, a person I had never met with a phone number that had never been made available to me. Because I missed more than 2 days, it didn't matter that I had a note because I was considered a no-call, no-show. The assistant manager, I gave my excuse to handed me a letter back that said I had 10 minutes to clean out my locker and vacate the premises or they'd call the cops for trespassing. I was 16, in a state with very liberal employment laws, and my mom retained a lawyer. I didn't win any money, but they ended up having to list me as rehire-able in their system, and they paid a huge fine for essentially making it impossible for employees to call in sick. Story 7. Earlier this year, I was working in a chicken processing plant in the freezer section. We rotated through 4 tasks in this area: making boxes, packing boxes, labeling boxes, and stacking boxes. Now, I had no problem with this. It was easy, if boring, work. What I did have a problem was labeling the boxes. We had to stand in such a way that I was slightly bent at the waist the entire time. And for some reason, this was causing a nerve to get pinched in my back. Tons of pain. I toughed it out for 2 weeks. After that, I couldn't take it anymore. I explained this to my boss. Told her that I'd gladly do a double on packing the chicken. Everyone hated that part. If I could just not label the boxes anymore. Or I'd take a double making boxes or stacking boxes. Didn't matter to me. Nope. Instead, I was fired and told to vacate the property. They wouldn't even let me sit in the visitor area until my ride arrived. Ended up spending 30 minutes standing in 27 degrees weather on the side of the road waiting on my ride. Yes, I am aware of the fact that firing me in such a way was illegal. And no, I couldn't draw unemployment. I had only worked there for 2 weeks. Officially, I was fired for refusing to perform assigned duties. Story 8. I told my manager at a fast food place that I was going to be looking for a new job and to not schedule me after this pay period. The next week, I see my name on the schedule and ask her what the deal is. I told you I was going to get a new job and not to schedule me. Well, did you get a new job yet? No, but I'm still not sticking around this one. Well, you know what? You can just not come back here now with that attitude. She sure showed me. Story 9. Fired a person for disappearing on their first day of work for a couple of hours. We worked in a manufacturing plant and he took off to try to find some cute girl he knew that worked there. The guy was married and he asked, "What am I supposed to tell my wife?" I said, "Probably not the truth." Story 10. I was told Friday out of nowhere, "We won't be needing your services anymore." After being told in November, I would have a position into next year at the minimum. So that's a fun holiday gift. Story 11. Was working in the deli counter of a supermarket. Asked from my closest manager that if I could come next week on Thursday 2 hours later, because I had a final exam that morning. Got fired on the spot. Don't bother coming to work tomorrow, you're fired. Story 12. Mine happened last year. I'd been working as a contractor for the Army Corps of Engineers for a number of years, traveling 100% of the time to all of my projects. I'd been looking for something that would have me be closer to home and sent out my resume to a couple of agencies and companies. I finally got a hit on one of them and scored an interview position for an IT specialist for the TSA. The interview went well, and I was informed that I would be more of a project manager than an actual IT technician, and that I'd be the sole person with its skills in my state for all the regional as well as the international airports. I was okay with the change, as it was a higher pay and better chance to learn new skills. I started the position in January of 2017 and started making myself at home and getting my name out to the personnel at the location I was working at. The deputy director of security seemed to think that since my office reported to him, that I was the dedicated it-box monkey for his site. Didn't matter how many times. I asked him to have him, as well as all those who worked in his office, to call in tickets to the help desk. They would constantly call my personal and work cell phones to have me come and fix whatever mundane issue at the time. The main reason why the deputy director had them call me, he told them to. The reason he felt that was a good direction to go. He didn't feel like they had the time to deal with the help desk. By month 4, I was extremely stressed out from working there. I got stressed going to work, and I stayed stressed when I got home. Sometime during the month of April, I had discussed with my wife that I am thinking of leaving the position. The stress and disrespect wasn't worth it. I sent an email to my previous employer and filled him in on what was going on. He immediately offered my old position back to me, and we agreed upon me starting back up with him that coming June. Jumped to the 2nd of May and walk into my office. Mr. Deputy Director entered my office about 30 minutes after I did. Already dreading seeing him there, I was just waiting for whatever pissant problem he was going to unload on me that day. Instead, he asked a different question. He pointedly asked me, "You don't like working here very much, do you?" Just slightly taken surprised by the question, I responded that working for him has been downright stressful. He pursed his lips, and I think he said, "Interesting," or something like that before he ordered me to pack my stuff up and turn in my access cards. I'd already been in the process of removing my personal effects to get ready for my previous job, so I didn't have much to take with me. I locked my computer, gave him my access cards, and put my company-issued iPhone on the desk, locked. He escorted me out of the building, and I think he wished me good luck, but I didn't care. I was free, or so I thought. I ended up getting emails and phone calls from them asking for the PIN to my company-issued iPhone. The first time they asked me, I asked what was in it for me. When they responded with nothing, really, I then said, "Then you can see how much I want to assist you in this pointless venture right now." That went on for 2 weeks before I told them that I will file harassment charges if they continued to call me on this. I took the rest of the month of May off to relax, wind down, and reconnect with my wife and kids before I went back to traveling full-time again. Sure, I was traveling, but at least me and my family were happy again. This was one job I didn't regret getting fired from. Story 13. I was fresh out of college at an IT contract-to-hire job. I came in on a Tuesday, sat down at my desk. The boss owner came up behind me and told me I was fired. I sat there, mouth open, and then asked, "Why?" He said that I was not a good fit for the company and that I had to leave. So I gathered my things and he stood there watching me, probably making sure I did not steal anything, and escorted me out of the office. I found out later that because of the size of the company at the time, they were looking for a Tier 3 worker, but I was a Tier 1. I told them this in the interview, but apparently they did not have the resources to train me. Well, joke's on them. I went through a month of unemployment and I found an even better job where I make a lot of money and work only half as hard as that job. Story 14. I was 16 and working as a dishwasher at a summer tennis camp at an exclusive tennis club. The owner of the club was upset that I hadn't taken all the trash out. I explained to him that the dumpster was full and overflowing. He told me that I needed to climb into the dumpster and jump up and down on the trash to create more room in it. I said that I wouldn't do it. He told me that he wouldn't ask me to do anything that he wouldn't do himself. So I said, fine. I want to see you climb into the dumpster and start jumping up and down. He fired me on the spot. Story 15. This wasn't me, but I witnessed the following. I worked at a camera store many years ago, and we received a life-size cutout of Andre Agassi, the tennis player, who was promoting Canon cameras. We set up the cutout in the store, but our crotchety owner came in, didn't like it, and told us to throw it out. So we put it away, but when the owner went out for lunch, we took it back out and proceeded to take a few goofy pictures in front of it. Then we put it back away. When the owner came back from lunch, he returned to his office, and then 5 minutes later came rushing down the stairs red-faced and screaming. We had forgotten about the security camera, and his secretary had snitched on us. "I told you to throw that thing out!" he screamed. He then went into the back room, dragged Andre out, and started trying to tear the thing apart, bending the head back and forth. That cardboard is pretty tough, though, and he was not a strong guy, so he just stood there for 30 seconds, furiously struggling with it. We were all trying to hold it in, but one of my coworkers couldn't help it and started laughing at the absurdity. Our owner heard it, whipped around and screamed, "You're fired! Get out of my store immediately!" We were all shocked, but the guy picked up his jacket, walked out, never to be seen again. Story 16. Fired from a sandwich shop because I couldn't cut the tomatoes fast enough. As I was being fired, the manager asked me if I wanted to work the shift I was scheduled for the next day after being fired. Story 17. Chef here. Got fired because I sent a steak out that had char on it. The only char on it was grill marks. Okay, lady, you probably just saved me a huge mess. Story 18. Ironically, I was having a really positive day at work. I'd been there about 9 months and was starting to really hit my stride. I had made some really positive improvements with production process and workflow. The company was better for my time there. My work actually resulted in them being able to eliminate an entire position, saving the company $30,000 a year. Around 3 p.m., I'm called into our small conference room and told that I'm being fired for saying that I hate this damn job and that I wasn't willing to go back into the warehouse and help out in the mornings. I was so completely caught off guard, and the fact that this was coming from the owner, I knew there was nothing I could say. But still, I defended myself by saying there was no way I would say that I hated my job. But still, I was guided to my desk where I packed up my stuff in shock and headed out. I remained in contact with one of my coworkers, and about a year later, it came out that the same thing was tried on her. Turns out the operations manager was just a nut, and having the ear of the owners, she would straight up lie to them and got people fired. Why? I still don't know. But they knew this second coworker much longer and better than myself. So when told them what the coworker supposedly was doing, they talked to her directly and determined that the was lying. She got canned this time instead. There are days I still wish they would have the balls to reach out to me and apologize. It's been 5 years now, though, so that won't be happening. That experience really shook me, and I can still see the effects to this day. That was my first real job out of college, and I had decorated my little office with personal items, some drawings my daughter had done, etc. Now, I refuse to decorate with anything personal, and I keep the bare minimum of personal articles in my office. Getting canned and having to stand there and be watched while I had to collect up all of these personal artifacts was embarrassing and humiliating. I don't plan on being fired again, but if need be, I can grab 2 things tops and walk to my car. Story 19. Almost a decade ago, I was in my apprenticeship to become an electrical planner. I'm Swiss. Over here, your first apprenticeship is very important, and it's hard to get any job at all if you don't have at least 1 apprenticeship done. As a result, there was big pressure in my last year of school to get a place. Initially, I wanted to do computer technician, but I just could not land a hit, so I had to start looking into other jobs. Eventually, I landed a job as an aforementioned planner. Let's not mince words. Not only did I hate the actual work right away, I also hated my boss and most of my coworkers. Initially, I just thought I would soldier my way through. Finishing your first apprenticeship is important. I managed a little more than a year before I started to get depressed, to the point that my parents were starting to notice, and my mother got on my case. I started missing work. I had a doctor that was very liberal in handing out a sick notice for 2 weeks straight. So I would work for a month or so, miss like 10 days of work, and then work for another month or so. My grades started to drop, and I actually started to give my boss and coworkers lip for being so crafty to me. For context, I was a glorified maid. Every morning, I had to take a 20-minute trip to the local bakery and get everybody their foodstuffs for the break. I frequently got abuse if the stuff they wanted was already sold out. Why didn't you leave earlier? Because I'm already leaving almost an hour before the break actually starts. And then other people start complaining the stuff isn't warm anymore. Then twice a day, I had to make coffee for everybody. They would frequently change their mind on the order and then berate me for screwing stuff up. Often, they would complain, even if I did exactly as they asked. You put too much sugar in. No, you just can't properly decide on how much you want. You asked for 3. I put in 3. And properly, the most offensive, I just couldn't do anything right. I was an apprentice. I earned maybe 1/10 of what the others made. And part of that deal is that you're allowed to screw up and then taught how to do it properly. No such luck. I was basically required to learn everything by myself or Google it. And then I would get 60-minute sessions of beratement for not doing the work properly. The final straw was on a Friday. I had to leave around 4 p.m. at the latest, so I could catch my train home. So I started cleaning everything around 3 p.m. 5 minutes before I planned to leave, I just finished cleaning the office floor, whereafter one of the workers walks in wearing muddy, snowy shoes, it was February, I think, ruining the entire floor again. I packed my stuff. Boss comes in, demands I stay to clean up. I don't remember my exact words, but it was said very loudly and would probably get me banned from most places online if I put it to the screen. When I came back on Monday, boss told me to get out immediately. I remember laughing the whole way home. I was free. Probably one of the best days of my teenage life. Joke's on him anyway. I still had a bunch of stuff I was supposed to bring to the post office in my backpack. Story 20. Not me, but my brother's. He was valeting at a fancy beach club over the summer and they hired a new kid from the area. The first car this new hire gets into, he backs into another car. My brother takes him to the side, tells him to calm down. The beach has insurance for this very reason. It's no big deal. Second car, he runs right into a parked car, which causes that car to smash into the one parked in front of it. My brother gives him $50 cash for the day of work and tells him not to come back. Story 21. My first job out of college was for a very small dental insurance claims clearing house. The company had recently split from another company, whose name was on the software that all the dentist offices used, so that was the name they recognized. The two companies were basically fighting over their client base, so my job was to call up all of their clients to remove the old software from the former partner and install the new janky-ass crap they'd cobbled together since the split. My job alternated between calling up customers to install the new software and train them on it, troubleshoot the problems with the software, and come up with workarounds, typically, during training calls. Clients typically were finding out from me that the software was changing, and I was supposed to insist that it was the same company, just different software. After almost a year of this, I was getting to a point where it just felt so awful to trudge my way into work because I knew I'd spend the day getting yelled at by clients who were upset that their routines were changing. I spent a lot of my downtime complaining to my friends over my personal email about how awful it was. Probably not the best thing to do, but I was young. Well, one day I come back from lunch and find the door to my office closed, and my boss standing there waiting for me. He showed me the emails he'd printed out from my personal email account with portions of conversations highlighted that he didn't like. I never used any names or revealed company information, just my emotions while working there. He shoved the papers in my hands and said, "Explain this to me." I basically said I was just having trouble with the day-to-day grind, but he just responded with, "I think it's time for you to find something else. Get out of here." Fine by me. I probably should have left before it got to that point. Story 22. I hated my last job. My coworkers were all right, but the guy over my department was an a-hole. Well, the time finally comes after many years. I get an offer, and of course I say yes. I had been plotting this moment. From my backpack, I pull a sympathy card that I'd been holding onto for a while. On the front, in memories we find comfort, in time we find peace. On the inside, so sorry for your loss. Sign my name, add a date for dollars now plus 14 days. Hand it to the bossman. Now I know for a fact that bossman would find it hilarious if this had happened to literally any other boss person in the company. But he had several sticks in his ass, so he fired me, told me hands off the computer, yelled a bit, insulted me several times, then walked me out the door. The company lawyer called in short order. "We've accepted your 2 weeks' notice. We don't require you to serve those 2 weeks, but you will get paid for it." Guess the whole, "you need to learn that your actions have consequences" bullcrap that bossman tried to pull when I submitted my notice kind of backfired on him. Bossman in question has a habit of yelling at people in exit interviews. I like to think they didn't schedule one for me because he knew I wouldn't put up with it. Story 23. I got fired from Borders because the person that was covering for me while I was on vacation got fired. What's even more messed up, I didn't even find out directly from them. Jose's girlfriend, she also worked there, texted me saying, "Hey, Jose got fired and you should probably call them because they have been expecting you." I called and store manager was like, "Yes, you're terminated. You can come and pick up your last check." I didn't even bother arguing because I was going to give my 2 weeks notice when I got back anyway because I was sick of their bullcrap. Story 24. Worked in a stockroom of a large, cheap clothing company. I was around 16 years old, I think. It was the most boring, mind-killing job involving moving boxes, unpacking boxes, unloading trucks, packing boxes, boxes, and more boxes. It was mostly teenagers working to earn some pocket money. You try stuff to make the shift go faster. I brought my MP3 player one day so I could listen to some music through headphones, but that wasn't allowed. So the intercom radio kept playing the same songs over and over. I think it was Scissor Sisters. I don't feel like dancing. And James Morrison, You Give Me Something. Anyways, one early Saturday morning shift, I was working with a colleague my age. We had to unpack a load of carts with boxes. You know how kids are. We started messing around, throwing the boxes to each other like volleyballs. A manager walked by and sent us to his office. We were told to leave and to not come back. It was a good day. I worked there for 3 months and I hated every second of it. Story 25. I forgot to pay for a hot dog. I ate the previous day of work. I had the money to pay and I would have if they asked me to. It genuinely slipped my mind, but the manager was treating me as a serious thief. Kind of sucked, but the job was pretty terrible too. Retail usually is. I should probably clarify that some of my coworkers had this happen to them before I was fired, but the difference being was that they got warnings. It doesn't bother me much because that manager was actually pretty scummy in the long run, and she lost the majority of her employees about a week after I was fired. Story 26. 17, still in high school. I was hired as a custodian for a hotel and was tasked to clean the pool. I was asked to back flush the system to clean the filters, which involves turning the pumps off and closing pipe valves. Well, there's about 20 valves, but only 3 needed to be closed. I thought I did them right. Went to open the filter on the pump and boom! The cap shot off and water started dumping out of the pump. The pool maintenance room is in the basement next to the pool, so it'll dump the whole pool if it's not stopped. I panicked and tried forcing the cap back on. Ran upstairs and through the hotel, completed soaked. It was the weekend, so my boss was off. Took him about 20 minutes to reach and get him to the hotel to help me with the system. In the end, there was probably a foot of water flooded the floor. It damaged the water heaters, got into the furnace, maintenance office, and phone system. Not sure on the damage cost, but it had to be in the hundreds of thousands, if not over $1 million. I was promptly fired by the hotel manager. Story 27, smoked a cigarette. Worked in a high-class restaurant when I was younger. Anyone that works in the service industry can tell you the holidays suck. Long hours for little pay in the kitchen, but the waitstaff make bank. I was the main prep person. I'd just come off a 120-hour work week a day prior and a huge mental breakdown at one point during that week. So all I had was a day to rest and get back to it. Went in for 7 as usual and was on track to make it out of the restaurant at about 10 that night with the next day off because I made a deal with my chef that if I prepped my stuff for the next 2 days, I could. I worked my ass off, mind you, I was about 18 years old working for nothing. When I started washing dishes there, it was for $7.50 an hour. And after 2 years, I had made it up to $8.25. Damn you, Chef Eric. I knew there was a no-smoking policy, but literally everyone in the kitchen still snuck off for quick cigarettes as I had as well for the past 2+ years. So I didn't think he would ever get mad as long as he didn't catch you. Well, my issue was that the head chef absolutely hated me. We constantly bucked heads. He would berate me, make me feel like a failure, etc. All while, I had worked loyally with my head down through the bull crap because I decided I wanted to be a cook, and it was actually a great outlet for me to end up getting clean, but that's a story for another time. Anyway, sorry for the long backstory, just want to give everyone a feel for the situation. I was about an hour or so from getting off. Just had to finish cleaning up and putting everything away, and I was home free after a 15-hour shift. At some point during the cleaning process, someone had went to the walk-in to grab more of the dinner rolls I had made for the day. Only thing that had to be made fresh daily, so I couldn't cook more otherwise. It would have been a non-issue. When they went to grab the tray that brought down the second tray of bread under it and causing him to slip, it all fell to the floor. I almost cried, and when my chef saw, he said the last words I wanted to hear. Well, guess you gotta stay longer so we don't run out for the night. I was speechless. I knew it was an accident, but this felt so unfair given I was literally almost out the door. I walked out of the kitchen and smoked a quick cigarette by my car after mentally preparing myself, and went back in. My chef came up to me, was about to say something, must have smelled the smoke and asked if I had smoked a cigarette. I replied yes, and he almost smiled. Get out of this kitchen, we don't need you anymore. I was shocked. His second-in-command smoked almost nonstop, as well as other employees, yet I was getting the axe. I hadn't even received so much as write-up in my time of working, but he finally found a reason to get rid of me. All in all, it was the best thing that could have happened. I went to another restaurant soon after, met the girl that is now my fiancée, and have left the service industry altogether to pursue my dream of becoming a teacher. Sorry for the wall of text. Story 28. One of my first jobs was working for this bucket telesales operation. We were selling long-distance plans. They would change the fee structure and resell the same plan under a different name to the same customers. I went 1 week top of the sales chart weekly bonus. Next week, I was at the bottom. This was the second or third week out of the training program as well. Ranking came out, they pulled me into the office and canned me for poor performance. I always thought it was because I walked in on them pulling names and numbers from different state phone books. They didn't have my final check ready that day. Next Monday when I called in to make sure they had it, someone I didn't recognize answered but told me to come down for my check. Turns out they got raided for that whole scummy plan bit. I had a brief interview with an FBI agent. They handed me my final check, and that place got closed down. Apparently, I missed out on a Who Crazy entry scene when they came in the front and the back to grab the management team. Story 29. Just got fired from my job 2 weeks ago after leaving my last company for this one. And in 10 months, no onboarding, no training. I had $1 million sitting in my pipeline when I left. Same as my manager, by the way. Brought in over 350 new leads to their client database, which was 0 when I got there because they just adopted a CRM for the first time. Never had a write-up. Manager didn't schedule his first manager meeting until 8 months after I started. After being fired, they had my colleague, who doesn't even report to the same manager, coordinate me dropping my key, badge off. Asked HR after if it was standard procedure to be fired without a write-up, to which she replied, "No, I'm in the middle of doing this now." The first HR person filed a lawsuit when she was let go. I asked if I could send an email to my clients letting them know I was departing. Then my manager lied to the HR rep and said that was never part of the conversation. I wanted to talk to a lawyer, but it's Texas. No workers' rights there. Story 30. Not me, but I witnessed it. Guy not only fired, but they had cops on site to escort him out. He was let go for a multitude of reasons. 1. Clocked in via phone, proceeds to show up 1 hour after his shift starts, then leaves hour early and clocks out via phone. 2. New access codes to vending machines, so he was stealing change out of them. Not all of it, but enough for discrepancies to be noticed. 3. Put paper towels on light bulbs in the bathroom. Stuffed paper towels down sink in break room. So he could be the hero who noticed this stuff prior to it causing a disaster. 4. General disrespect of fellow employees. 5. Taking advantage of laxate policies and not actually working the odd. Story 31. I was told that my position was being terminated, not just at our branch, but company-wide, and was escorted back to my office to pack up my stuff. And it wasn't dramatic or anything, but it was a shock. Say goodbye to anybody. Just 2 days prior, I'd had my performance review and received glowing praise, while the entire time, they knew they'd be letting me go in a couple of days. That's what bothered me the most. Story 32. One year I was working at a summer camp. It was my first year, but a bunch of people had been going for years. This year, it was a brand new director and she was useless, regularly telling us she was too busy to do her job. Often told us that if she did the hiring, she would have gotten good employees. Told people that we can't get mad at kids and needed to use positive reinforcement. Then when they got in trouble, just took them away and did nothing. Completely useless woman. There was an incident the day before this where one kid got 3 fingers like claws and scratched another while transitioning to the afternoon care, when the day staff were supposed to go to the office and plan activities for the next day. We were all inside when this happens, and so was the director, who was actually supposed to be helping outside. Our director and regional manager come out the next day and give written warnings to a bunch of people for being inside during out planning time. One of the 4 guys working at our camp, 37 employees, 4 were male, including me, stands up and says it's crap that we get written warnings for doing what we were told during training, but they didn't care, they wanted a scapegoat. He got angry and fired in the spot for speaking up against our director, who was fired 3 weeks later for sucking at her job. Story 33. In high school, my friend, whose nickname was Substances, was scratching his balls with his hand down inside his pants while flipping burgers at McDonald's. The owner stepped around the corner, saw him, and fired him in seconds. Story 34. After graduating from grad school, I was having trouble finding jobs in my chosen career. I ended up applying to retail jobs just to get an income. I got hired at Old Navy, went through training, and even had 1 to 2 shifts. Then I got hired in my chosen career. Great. I went and told one of my managers, who was totally cool with it, understood, and even said I might be able to stay on part-time and help out during the holidays. Cool. Next shift, I have to tell the other manager that I got a new job. I just clocked in to start work, told this manager, and she tells me I can leave. I clock back out. Wasn't even allowed to work that shift. I barely knew her, but just from the short interactions I had with her, she seemed like an idiot. Story 35. I was 16, and it was my first job as a lifeguard in a neighborhood by my house. It was a very relaxed pool, and we were never completely packed, and the kids that did frequent the pool seemed to like me. As a lifeguard, I was often audited. The pool company's owner's son would come around and test our lifeguard skills, and I passed twice that summer. Towards the beginning of August, he came around while our pool was shut down because of thunder and rain, and I kid you not, they audited me while it was storming. Me, young and stupid, not wanting to lose my job, said, "Okay." And in comes the owner's son's friend, who probably weighed over 300 pounds. I'm 115 pounds. He jumped into the deep end and sank to the bottom, and I was supposed to save him. I tried, and I couldn't do it. He was dead weighting me, and pretty sure he was pushing himself to the bottom, and rain was getting in my eyes, and I was panicking because lightning. Came back up, and I was fired on the spot. Got a call back later saying, "We'd love to have you if you took the training class again." Class was 10 hours, Friday, Sunday, it's 30 hours. and I said no and hung up. Story 36. Didn't push the crafty store credit cards enough. Was pulled off the till by a manager and he asked why I didn't try to sign the customer up for a card. He was watching us. I told them the customers don't want them, or should we push them? If they want them, they will ask. I was pulled into the office and fired or laid off because they did not need extra staff, and I was a problem child, as he worded it. Because screw actual customer service and making sure the store doesn't look like a war zone. Look who's laughing now, Sears. Fired 7 years ago, 6 months was too long to work at a crap hole like that. They destroyed themselves. I'm glad so many others have the same opinion. They preyed on people who didn't understand credit terms, who had bad credit, or were new to the country. How can you sign someone up so quickly for a crazy high-interest credit card and have a conscience? Daily, we had people coming to the register with bills, not knowing what they were getting billed for, or totally confused by the card and pissed off by the high interest and card fees. I was told by management when I was fired that in 6 months I only signed up, did applications 3 people, when it should have been closer to 1,300. Yes, 1,300. Even though so many of my shifts were before store hours doing price changes or cleaning. The store could look like a bomb went off, and they would rather us push crafty cards. I got in trouble because I spent too much time helping customers and cleaning up the clothing. Yes, for things most stores require. Story 37? Not on the spot, but like 2 hours later because they had to adjust everything and plan on it first. Short story, I told the venue manager to duck off. I was head chef at a venue, fairly new to the company, recently promoted, and my store had some staff issues I inherited. I did a week training at a different store, his sous chef babysat for me, worked with the head chef, and then he came to my store the next week. So I get in on day 1 with him, and he proceeds to rip me a new one about how my line isn't topped up. Removed half the ingredients because he didn't approve of the quality. This turned into him just being a complete idiot and bullying me for 2 hours. My virtual manager walks in at 12. I say good morning. Act like I'm fine. I'm a 27-year-old white girl working in a multicultural company. My kitchen, and the other one I worked at, is built up of mainly Indian and Afghani males who prefer to speak their languages. These 2 dudes are great mates, both from India, went to high school together or some crap. I don't want to start anything, so I sort of keep to myself right now. I'm angry and upset, but I'm here to learn, so let's get to it. Starts with a roux. Add your things, make a dip. I weigh everything in the first step out in the pot, set it on the stove. Go grab my cheese. He starts yelling at me to start it again because the butter wasn't melted in the pot first. I'm like, damn this guy, he's not gonna damn beat me, I'll play along. Quickly chop some jalapenos, chop some butter, weigh the flour, and start again. My VM walks in and asks me, why did you use a green knife to cut butter? In my haste, I did indeed do that. I turned around and told him to duck off and ran out crying. I had enough, I got fired. They labeled it gross misconduct. I had a new role 4 days later. Damn them. Story 38. I was 21. My first real, full-time job was as an apprentice in an aircraft instrument repair shop. It was a small shop, just the owner, a bookkeeper, and myself. I loved it and was really enjoying working with my hands and being around the aircraft all the time. Just as we were closing up one day, the owner got a call. A customer needed an instrument. Did we have it, and could we send it out right away? We did have it. And since it was closing time, the owner told me to box up the part and label it. While I was doing that, he wrote out a check to UPS and left the amount blank. He gave me the check and told me that it was very important that the part get to UPS on time and to fill in the amount when I sent it. He also told me to be sure and bring back the receipt. The owner left me to lock up and take the package to UPS on the way home. I finished boxing up the part, locked up the shop, yes, he trusted me with a key, and took the package to UPS. When I went to the counter, the guy weighed the package, printed out a ticket which got stuck on the box, and pitched the box onto the belt. I watched the package disappear down the conveyor and reached in my pocket for the check the owner had given me. When I looked at the check, I realized that he had put the date, made the check payable to UPS, left the amount blank, but had also failed to sign the check. I didn't have enough cash on me to pay for the shipping. The box had already gone down the belt. The owner had stressed that this was a good customer and the part had to get there the next day. The check was already filled out to UPS, so I went ahead and wrote in the amount, $4, this was 1977, signed my boss's name on the check and handed it over to the guy behind the counter. He took the check. The package made it to the customer. The next day, when I arrived at work, I immediately told my boss, the owner, what had happened. He fired me on the spot for signing his name to the check and watched me while I packed up my tools and left. Story 39. I was up all night playing Doom 2 with some friends. I literally stayed up all night, and at 5 a.m. I left to open the convenience store I worked at. I managed to get the coffee started and the store open. I thought I was going to be able to pull it off until about 7 a.m., and a wave of tiredness hit me like a ton of bricks. I was just standing behind the counter, swaying back and forth, literally rocking myself to sleep. Some customers were amused, but most were pissed because I wasn't paying any attention to them. One guy knew my boss and called him and told him I was sound asleep. So my boss comes in, and I'm actually conscious, but you can tell I'm fading fast. He brings me into the back room, and as he's reprimanding me, I fall asleep standing in front of him, so he shakes me awake and tells me to just go home if I can drive without killing someone. When I called him that afternoon to apologize, he told me not to come in anymore. Story 40. I was already quitting. Put in my 30 days when working for an IIT consulting firm, while I was allocated to work in a financial institution. I hated it there. Had been there for 3 months, but I had been working for the consulting firm for 1.5 years and got a much better offer to move up to project management, which was an amazing step for me. The financial institution was notified that I had put in my 30 days during my lunch hour by the consulting firm. I was told I could leave when I came back from lunch. The consulting firm let me go as well since they wouldn't need me for anything else just for those 30 days. Which was cool. I called my new boss and he told me I could start sooner if I wanted to. Took a 1-week vacation between jobs and then started. Story 41. I was working in a USPS priority shipping center during Christmas break from college back in 2002. It's fairly brutal work, tossing packages non-stop for the entire 8-hour shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I know. It's not a gulag or anything, but to a spoiled 20-year-old at the time, I recall hating it. So there's this massive conveyor belt structure that basically runs the entire length of this Titanic warehouse. It's huge, kid. And they would store a ton of carts and other junk under there for storage. So, naturally, I took to hiding out underneath it whenever the opportunity arrived. Pretty crafty thing to do, but alas, was young and foolish. This went on for a good week when I decided to get bold and took to laying down inside a pushcart and covered myself up for what I had hoped would be a brief nap. It's loud and a little cold, so I thought I'd be good. But nope. Slept for a good 4 hours, only to awaken to a search party send out to see if I had died under the belt. The boss applauded my bold action, but showed me the door all the same. Story 42. I worked in a medical office, trying to be vague about specialty, and the doctor was doing horrifically illegal things that were putting patients at risk for damages and disease. Things like having unlicensed employees performing duties that they shouldn't and not, practicing proper hand washing, instrument sterilization, etc. Not to mention the doctor was rude and would frequently yell at staff. During my employment, I brought attention to things that were being done and confronted the doctor in front of the rest of the staff. She fired me on the spot. I had been keeping record of infractions as they were revealed. A lot of the more awful things were hush-hush and turned the office in to the Attorney General in my state. Story 43. Not me, but a person who worked with me. My job had people come and go like it was a drive-thru. We had one guy who was down that same path. He came in and started cutting the pizzas. I'm helping him, and he's a nice guy. Skip a couple of weeks, and this guy's a master. Even during rush, he still has time to pick up orders. Manager comes in. Ask him how he's liking his job. He says that he's glad that he works here. Manager fires him on the spot. Next guy comes, and it continues in the cycle. Story 44. It was my first job. I think I was 17 years old at the time. I worked at a local grocery store a couple days a week as a cashier. One morning, my dad had just dropped me off at work, and it was a slow Sunday morning. A couple hours into my shift, a girl comes in and buys a pack of cigarettes. I forgot to ID her, and turns out she was underage, and it was one of those sting things, which when I worked there, I did not know that was even a thing that happened. Well, a guy comes in with the same girl and talks to the manager, tells him what happened. After the two leave, he pulls me to the side and tells me that I am fired. I was devastated, because I was a really good kid and followed by the rules, and hated getting in trouble. I then go outside, call my dad, and the minute he answered, I burst into tears. I tell him that I need him to pick me up because I was fired. He comes, picks me up. I tell him what happened, and he calms me down. Then my mom comes home from church and tell her what happened. She was fuming. My mom was saying that I should have been selling cigarettes or alcohol in the first place because it is illegal for a minor to do so. Then my mom and I go back to the store, and my mom is talking to the manager how it is wrong, that I was not supposed to be selling them in the first place, and etc. After all that, the manager says that I can have my job back. I just cannot be a cashier anymore, but my mom refused to let me work there anymore. Story 45. TL Owner of the company would change my designs, complain about me ordering too much material, and then belittle me with emails copying everyone. I finally responded in kind and was fired. I was an engineer at a company, glorified term for the guy who designs construction projects and orders the material on smaller-scale telecom projects. The owner of the company would take a big group of installers to install the projects. He was always writing us engineers to use up smaller pieces of inventory from the warehouse instead of ordering brand new stuff. For example, do not order the 10-foot piece of steel if you can have the warehouse pull a 4-foot from our stock. Well, I would design the projects and only order the longer pieces if it was part of my design requiring, and I would bid the project based on that design. Never failed, the owner would go to site with his ragtag group, tear apart my design, build it completely different than my design, and then get at me for ordering too much material. He would send me nasty emails copying everyone. Keep in mind that he would install the job with a much different design than we bid for. which means our quotes should have been reduced per our contract with our client. I finally had enough of him berating me and sent a nasty email response to one of his belittling emails he sent and copied the entire world like he always does. I show up to work, and my direct line supervisor laid me off. I knew very well that my email would probably get me fired and that I was burning a bridge, but I already had another job lined up and it felt so good to tell that guy to duck off. My manager was laughing about the email as he was telling me that he had to lay me off. 3 months after all of this, the owner's wife was calling me and asking if there was any way in would return. I declined for obvious reasons. Story 46. One of my first jobs out of college. A small publishing house. One of the owners was an awful human. I've never heard someone talk to customers on the phone as rudely as this person did. Just mean, rude, disrespectful, condescending, and to top it off, not very smart, but with a huge ego. I had been hired to do book design and, eventually, to help them build a website. When I got hired, I was very clear that I had not done either of those things before, but wanted to learn. So I'm doing my best with no real training or experience. Nobody ever brings up building a website. I just assume they'll let me know when they want me to work on that project. One Friday, maybe 6 months in, I'm doing some random work in the morning and the hateful owner wants to see me in the main office. This person fires me, telling me that it was because I never worked on the website as we agreed was part of my job, but they want me to stay and finish out the day, and then the owners both leave to do errands. This is the only time I'd ever been fired, and I was devastated. Plus, there was no way I was finishing the day. So I took the opportunity of the owners being gone to pack up my stuff and say goodbye to my coworkers. A few weeks later, they send me my last paycheck with a horrid, abusive letter from this hateful person telling me everything that was wrong with me. I was young and had no self-esteem, so I was just destroyed by this letter. My boyfriend consoled me and told me to burn it, so I did. Later, as I continued to work in the industry, it came out that everyone knows this hateful person is insane. When I would tell people I worked for them, their eyes would go wide and they'd shake their heads. Story 47. The summer between undergrad and graduate school, I was working in the customer service department of a Canadian department store. I got minimum wage plus $1 extra an hour because I was the only person capable of answering the phones in English and French. I asked for a Saturday off to attend my sister's high school graduation. They said, "What's more important to you, this job or the graduation?" I said, well, the graduation actually, particularly in light of the fact that I was starting my second degree in another city about 10 weeks later. Axed immediately. Well, good luck finding a bilingual Albertan willing to work for minimum wage plus one, you stupid idiots. Story 48. I was teaching at a Catholic school, had a young child. My partner and I had separated due to domestic violence. The priest at the school found out I had a child and wasn't married. Asked me why not. I didn't hold back. I said, because he hit me so hard that he caused some kind of lesion in my brain, I have to take daily medication, beat me, and broke my tooth. The priest said, "So you're not even with him at all?" I asked him if that was what he got from what I just told him, not the beatings. He said I wasn't living by the Catholic ethos and I was fired that day. Told if I marry him, I can have my job back. Nothing could make me marry him. This is in Australia. I don't know if teachers can be fired in other countries for not living by the Catholic ethos. I will never teach in the Catholic system again. I worked there for about 3 years and worked my arise off. My principal was there crying, saying, "I'm irreplaceable," but that didn't matter to the priest. I know of several cases that occurred for the same reasons. Some got their jobs back when they agreed to marry. Others left for the fact they weren't going to get bullied into marrying someone, whether they loved them and were planning on marrying them anyway or not. Disgraceful. I now teach in the public system and love it. The kids are happier, the teachers are happier, the principal is cool as can be, and all teachers have a mix of relationship status here. Story 49. I was a manager of a customer service team. Our team was completely underwater. Our CEO wouldn't approve any more headcount for my team. He wanted fast response times and resolution times. I needed 24 people to meet his demands. I had 11. The customers were blowing up the business on social media because of the CEO's bad business policies, and the customer service team took the brunt of the pain. The coup continues to push the team to work harder, which is clearly not possible when underwater. Myself and my team were constantly working double shifts to keep up with the work. For some reason, this guy didn't understand that you can't squeeze water from the stone. In my one with him, I asked for more headcount. He said no. I showed him data. He told me to go duck off with the data. I asked him to treat me with respect and to watch his language with me. He decides to unleash a torrent of belligerence. I calmly tell him to watch his language again. He doesn't stop. I get in his face about how bad he is as a manager, CEO, and a person. He fired me. I throw my badge at his face and walk out the door. Over the next couple months, I proceed to poach all the customer service employees from the team for my new job. Good luck running your business, idiot. The business went bankrupt 5 months after I was fired. Story 50. This just happened. Was working for a small startup with an absolute of a boss. He would yell, demand 110% from his employees while he could barely afford to pay us. Paychecks were never on time and would constantly demean me. He was an all-around misogynist. I talked back one time. He asked me, "Hey, how often are you on time to work?" I responded, "How often do we get paid on time?" And the next day he texted me to bring my keycard and keys to work and fired me. Good riddance. I've never felt better. It seriously felt like I was released from prison. Story 51. I was 16. It was my first job. I had landed a nice IT help desk job, answering phones, logging jobs, fixing internet, crap like that. 6 weeks of unpaid training and 6 months of working hard landed me with my own office and a weird medley of every job there was to have. Only the CEO and I had our own offices. I wasn't paid more, I wasn't given any more recognition, and they actually had the balls to ask if I could work from Tuesday to Friday on a lower pay. I got Mondays off from school. They wanted me to work Monday to Friday from 8 to 8 on a $8 a month pay, so I said no, and was fired instantly in front of 12 other coworkers. Awkward. Story 52. As a backpacker in Australia around 2006, got a job working for a motivational speaker, life coach, predatory fraudster. Basically, people would come to his free session on a Saturday, and then, if they were interested, would leave their number for people like me to call them back and try to sell the paid weekend to them. Our script included things like how to advise people who said they couldn't afford it on how they could use their social welfare payments to pay for it. Really scummy. Anyway, on one call, a guy straight up asked me if this fella was a fraud. I said, "Between you and me, I think he is." Just as the supervisor walked past, she tapped me on the shoulder and whispered, "Make that your last call." Hung up and left. Really wish I could remember his name. Michael something. Scumbag. Weirdest thing about the whole experience was that the workshop was held in a massive arena, and we were in the main dressing room all week, but had to leave on the weekend because Alice Cooper was playing and needed the dressing room. We were moved to a hospitality suite near the stage, so we're trying to sell this bullcrap course with Alice Cooper blasting out in the background. Story 53. I was hired as a construction laborer, but also I drove people to the job site, 2 hours one way, in the company vehicle. They didn't pay me for these hours, saying that I'm saving on tolls and gas, and I get to take the van home and use it for whatever. No problem, as I was young and job was easy, and I spoke English, which made me a go-to guy between inspectors and engineers. Boss had a close friend working with us who would watch me like a hawk and hated my guts, because I got to take a van home while he had to commute to a meeting spot. He wanted to take the van home and meet us and me to do the 2 hours drive. One day, he just started to insult me, and I told him to go and take a hike, but in not so nice way. He calls the big boss right away, who fired me on the spot. Not a problem. Handed in the keys and walked out to the train station. They run after me saying that someone needs to drive the van home and close the job site. But I said that since I'm fired and this was a military installation, I would be trespassing since I turned in my contractor ID to the first MP I saw. Crap that created so many problems as nobody wanted to drive. Shutdown procedures were no followed. Equipment got stolen. Nobody wanted to pony up for tolls and gas. I was rehired week later and apologized to. Story 54. I was a cashier at Fred Meyer. Some days they would put my on-cart duty, bringing carts inside for customers to use. On this particular day, it was hot outside, around 104 degrees. Customers were angry due to the heat. Fellow employees were on edge. One particular employee was pissed that he was also put on cart duty rather than cashiering indoors with air conditioning. He decided to take it out on me. He would try to be like my boss and send me to do carts while he watched from inside where it wasn't hot. I was 18 at the time, he was like 24, so he was a few years my senior. So I complied for about an hour. But carts were getting behind because only I was doing my job. I went inside and told my boss that he wasn't doing crap. My boss said he would talk with the guy. I went back outside. About 10 minutes later, that guy came back out, and while pushing carts in, he rammed one into the backs of my ankles. I told him to duck off. Well, I guess some customer heard that and complained to my boss because he pulled us both into his office. My boss didn't care that the guy had been harassing me and not doing his work. I had sworn in front of a customer and was promptly fired on the spot. I visited that Fred Meyer not too long ago. That a hole of an employee is now floor manager. Story 55. I was 3 months in my job, and I was getting harassed by my manager constantly for several weeks. Every day, they'd follow me to the bathroom and make comments the whole time I needed to be in there. I felt uncomfortable with this and reported it to HR. The next day, the president of the company came to the office and summoned me and the HR rep. He brought up my concerns and asked me what I wanted. I said I just wanted him to be professional and not follow me to the bathroom every time I have to go. After I finished, he said, "Okay, well, here's the thing. I've read the reports and it just doesn't look like you're a good fit here. It's within 90 days, so we're just going to terminate your employment immediately. You'll be escorted out." And that was it. I hated myself for opening that can of worms, but at the same time, damn that guy. Story 56. Sears used to pay their electronics folks commission on top of base pay for big items. It was a pretty nice rate for commission. Anyways, we would price match compared to Fry's or Best Buy. This was 2005. Sometimes we made up Best Buy prices and would just say it was a promo weekend there. I wasn't a great salesman and would incentivize customers to buy out of desperation. I'd take off like $400 sometimes. One time a customer and I really hit it off. Super nice folks, came in around the holidays. I got on first name basis with them by the end. Anyways, loss prevention called me in and showed me on camera making the sale. I slipped up and said, "Oh, that's Ed and his family." They thought I knew them on a real friend or family basis and gave them a $3,000 TV, fired on the spot. Pay your workers more than $7 an hour base, and you won't see crap like that. People will sort out a way to cheat the system on you if you pay pennies. I got away with price matching probably 20 times before I got called on it. That Sears passed away and gone now. I say good riddance. Story 57. Operations manager here on the day of the Christmas dinner for the company. I texted one of the new employees who didn't show up at the restaurant we were having dinner at. This new employee was with us for 2 months and was hired even after having bad reviews from previous employees, but still thought I will give him a chance because we were in a pinch. His previous employer said he has issues getting to work or getting to work on time. He had no driver license, so I asked one of the other employees with company vehicle to pick him up in the morning, and sometime he literally had to wake him up. Coming back to the day of the Christmas dinner, he replied back saying that he will need roughly 38% raise from his current salary, otherwise he's quitting, because this other company offered him a job. I thanked him for his time with us and enjoyed rest of my evening. A couple of months later, he called begging for his job back, and you all know what my answer was. Story 58? Perfect. This just happened to me in September. I was a marketing manager at a fairly large digital advertising agency. I showed up to work on Wednesday at the same time I always did, nothing out of the ordinary. My direct manager from the office up north was in for a strategy meeting. He and I sat down with my team and did some Q2 number reviews, goal setting, strategy for the remainder of 2018, talked about the pros and cons and how hopeful and optimistic he was. Then it was back to work as usual. About 2 hours later, he calls me into the conference room. I bring my laptop to take notes and figure we were going to go over more numbers or something. I look to my right at the end of the long conference room table, and the SVP of operations is sitting there, albeit with an uncomfortable, scared look on his face. They tell me to close the door. My manager: "We decided today is your last day." Didn't really give me any good reason why, but I found out it was a few days before earnings call, and they had missed their projected quarter numbers, and I was the most expensive employee on the team. Story 59. I lasted one day as a checkout cashier at a small Quik Mart down the street from my house. It was rough. I liked the customers, though, who were kind and patient and gave me tips, where my boss just stood there with his arms folded, glaring at me. I had told him I didn't know how to work the cash register, but he insisted I do it anyways. So I go into work the next day feeling good about what I learned. I've just opened up the line and am ringing up customers when he walks up and tells me, "You're fired, get out." He has some other girl with him. 2 women in line protest. "Why are you firing her? She's doing a great job." He glares at them and again tells me I'm fired, that I'm too slow. I walk out and, of course, burst into tears, just in shock. 2 days later, my roommate comes home and tells me his friend who works there as a stalker told him the reason I was fired was the manager wanted his niece to work there, and the owner kept saying no, but finally relented, you guessed it, just before I walked in for my shift. 2 weeks later, they were robbed at gunpoint, and the niece quit on the spot afterwards. I got called by the manager and asked if I'd like my old job back. I told him where to put the cash register. Story 60. I've never been fired for anything, laid off since they were closing a department though, but I got someone fired on the spot. As a kid, I went to the library on my bike and it got stolen. Months later, I see it in the back of a Friendly's near the employee parking. I called the police since I had already filed a report with them. Easy to identify since it had some pretty unique features like a custom valve cap I found once, and the handbrake on the left side didn't work. Police asked the manager if he knew who came in on the bike, and he said it was one of his cooks. They informed him it was stolen from me, so the manager called him over and berated him pretty badly while they put cuffs on him and promised to call all the other local restaurants so they don't hire him. Pretty sure he said, "I knew you were a damn loser, but stealing a kid's bike. Really? You're like 25 years old, you." I think he ended up getting community service. Story 61. I worked in logistics for a gov contractor. Let's call them generally dynamic. I worked in a warehouse, the secure part, managing assets and their movements all over the world. I was the only cleared person working there, so I flew solo for 50% of the warehouse. The team of 40 ran the other half. My time was split between being on the warehouse floor managing orders, repairs, counts, and audits, and at my desk where I worked in an asset management program that had blue banners and a columns. It looked a lot like Facebook. So one Friday, I was called into the director's office where an HR rep and a manager who wasn't even my own handed me a letter of termination. I was told that I spent too much time on Facebook and that I was to leave immediately. My things were shipped to me later. Best and worst day of my career to date. That company was toxic, lacked any sort of good spirit, and that program is probably still running in the red. I now work for a company that actually cares about their employees, provides real benefits, and doesn't have a director who has the mentality and fashion of an 80 truck driver. Good riddance. Story 62. Boss wanted me to work extra hours, travel in traffic and congestion, and do 14-hour-long days for no extra pay or benefits. And I said, not sure I am willing to do it. I need to think about it. Next day, pulls me into his private office and fires me saying my skills were not on par with what they expected. Bye, idiot. I now work in a place closer to home, so I don't have to travel as much or as long, earning more for doing less hours and less work. XD. Story 63. I worked at a small, 8-employee call receiving center, no outgoing calls. This one girl was always a giant idiot, but she showed up on time and answered the phone, so that's all we could ask. One week, she harped on and on and on and on about how the employee fridge was dirty. Now, it wasn't the cleanest because it was used, but it wasn't sticky or smelly or gross. It was just cluttered and sometimes something spilled a little. No biggie. But she wouldn't shut the duck up about it. One shift, she literally didn't stop talking about it for 4 hours between calls until my supervisor handed her a rag and said, "If you're going to get about it, you can clean it yourself." The girl's eyes went wide and her mouth gaped open and closed like a goldfish, and then she went, "That's not my job. That's for custodians to do." My boss reached over to her desk, took her employee card, and said, "Then you don't work here anymore. Go get your lunch out of the fridge and go home." My mouth dropped and I was ecstatic. Damn you, Ashley. Story 64. I banked on the fact that when I turned in my resignation, my boss, and a whole extraordinaire, would fire me on the spot. I turned in my resignation on a Friday at 3 p.m. By 5 p.m., I had been given the heave-ho and handed my check. He watched me clean out my desk, which amazingly had already been purged, and grab my plant. Then I handed over my computer passwords and keys and was escorted to the elevator to make sure I was gone. The look on his face the following Monday was priceless as we both entered the crowded elevator together. He asked why I was there. Was I job hunting? At this point, I got to inform him that I wasn't looking, as I already had a job as his landlord. I made sure to remind him rents were due and to have a happy day. I spent the next 2 years gloating, never regretted a moment of the long, drawn-out payback. Story 65. Might be too late, but I have one. I applied and was hired as a social media person and light bookkeeping by a rich landscaping firm, as in they usually only accept $500,000 jobs minimum. It became clear they knew nothing about social media when I showed them a picture of one of their jobs I had posted to Pinterest had been repined 6,000 times. It had their company logo and brought people back to the website. And instead of being happy, they asked me to get in contact with someone about copyright infringement. It also became clear that they actually wanted me to take over their accounting department when their current person was about to go on maternity leave. I really tried my best, but I was not suited for this position. We are talking about people's paychecks, accounts payable, receivable, taxes, credit card reconciliation, etc. I was being paid $12 an hour. They fired me like no 2 weeks. Goodbye, I cried. The owner was sympathetic, I guess. I told him I hope no one pulls this on one of his daughters in the future. Advertise for the damn job you're hiring for. Story 66. Did not happen to me, but I was involved. At a place I worked, people came to me saying someone was making dirty comments about my body, and they told Har about it. So when I got called in, I said, well, yeah, that makes me uncomfortable. And the person got fired on the spot. It was a huge deal because everyone knew about it. I had only been working there for a little less than a year, and they had been there for over 10. Story 67. So this kind of fits. Back in 2012, I worked in a crafty restaurant in my hometown. I was a dishwasher, and the place would skimp out on feeding me during my shift by saying they were too busy. They only had me and one chef on, so no matter how many people were eating during lunch, it was all on him. Anyway, after one shift, I go to clock out and see my boss having an interview with someone. I say my goodbyes and head home for the day. The next morning, about 10 minutes before I go in for my shift, my boss calls me and tells me to not come in that day. In fact, don't come in again. You're fired. He refuses to give me a reason, but I suspect that the guy he was interviewing was a friend of his, and he wanted my job. Found out it closed a year later because the owner of the restaurant was convicted of money laundering and substances trading. Story 68. I was about 18 years old, working at a company that acted as the middleman between gaming companies and the sellers. We'd receive the games, consoles, accessories, and package them up, and send them off to Walmart, games, etc. I was working in the warehouse as quantity control, the final step before we sealed the boxes and shipped them out. I was one of 2 white people in the warehouse. It was mostly Indian, Filipino, and Chinese workers. I wasn't there one day. Someone took over my duties. They were bad at it. Pallets wrapped poorly, wrong stuff in the wrong boxes, etc. I came in the next day and was fired immediately because of all the duck-ups the day prior. I told them I wasn't even there. They knew I wasn't even there. They went out onto the floor and asked whose fault it was, and they all pointed their fingers at me. Story 69. I worked in a warehouse on a forklift, finding products stacked so high I couldn't see them. I missed one order and stupidly put the paperwork back in as not there, instead of just bearing it, and bang, sacked with the words pure damn laziness. As an agency worker, that was it. Damn those people. Story 70. Worked for GNC in college. At the end of every month, we were required to throw away expired items. Well, I figured I'd just keep the tub of protein that expired the week before, since I had to throw it away anyways. As I was closing up and walking out, the general manager stopped by and fired me on the spot. So yeah, I got fired for keeping something that I was supposed to put in the trash. Story 71. Was working in a restaurant. Server broke a glass in the ice bin. Didn't clean it up or tell anyone. Just went about her business. Another server went to get drinks for her table and found glass in the ice. Owner fired her on the spot because she could have easily passed away somebody if the other server wouldn't have caught it. Story 72. Not me, but I witnessed this happen to a coworker. We worked at a brewery, restaurant, full restaurant, bar with a brewery in the building. During a busy Friday night, my waiter coworker took a very drunk and very married woman into the brewery and received a BJ from her. Well, the brewery had glass walls and was visible from the restaurant, so they were discovered very quickly. The GM walked in and told him to get the duck out and never come back. I've never seen someone look so satisfied while walking out of a job after being fired on the spot. Story 73. Mom, brother, and I were at Olive Garden about 20 years ago. We had the worst waiter in the history of the world. He was outrageously rude to the point of being abusive to us. At the end of the dinner, my mom left him a dime for a tip, and as we were leaving, the waiter threw the dime at my mom. I was a little kid otherwise. I would have probably at least attempted to defend her. Waiter's boss saw the dime throw and fired the waiter on the spot. Everyone has a bad day, but that guy was just a... Story 74. Started work at a daycare once. We're told if littles have a hard time going down for nap, sit next to them and pat their backs. I was doing this and my back was killing me, so I stretched out next to the kid's cot. Was laying there patting when the boss stormed in and said, "Wake up! You're fired!" Idiot, I wasn't damn sleeping, but these nursery rhymes damn sure got me ready to sew toddles. Story 75. There was no follow-through on this, but I was working at an insurance agency while in my last year or so of college. The boss was moving offices, because he did that every few years just for something to do. The office suites were all in the same building, and wanted me to come in the next day, Saturday, to help box things up. It was my brother's college graduation, though, and we were driving out to it. A few hours drive, so I said I couldn't. So he said, "Don't bother coming in Monday then." I was actually thrilled because he was an idiot and I wanted out. But then he came back and said, "Sorry, you can come back." Anyway, he passed away, so it all worked out. Story 76. I was once working for this company out of my dad's office. I worked for a different company. He was just letting me use his extra office. I would get assignments over email. A lot of the time, I would finish an assignment and then ask what my next would be and not hear from anyone, sometimes for multiple days. And I would email multiple people each day. At one point, my boss refused to pay me because he felt I wasn't doing a good enough job, so I reported him to the Division of Labor. I immediately received an email saying I was fired because I reported him. Story 77. My boss set me up to be fired with an email he knew I would react badly to. When I reacted badly, he fired me on the spot. Joke was on him. I took the other two guys in my department with me and our company suddenly had no tech support. I was supposed to be going on an international trip the following week, and since we were all gone, it had to be delayed indefinitely, which ended up costing the company the order. About $3 million because he didn't like that. I didn't want to travel 150 days a year on a 5-precinct travel contract. Story 78. I started a new job 3 weeks ago. When I received my first pay, I noticed that I was missing 10 hours pay over a 2-week period. I asked to speak with the boss and he said, "Who pays me when I have to wait for you to finish your run?" I said that I thought that he was taking advantage of me. He replied, "You think I'm cheating you? Don't come back on Monday." Story 79. I put an old concrete bird bath on the corner for trash pickup and the guy that mowed my lawn asked if he could have it. The next week, he didn't show up or call. The following week, he showed up and mowed. When I went out to pay him, he told me the price was double the usual amount. I asked why, and he said it was because he double mowed since the grass was so long, and he had to charge extra for removing the bird bath last time. I paid him the regular amount, told him to duck off and not to come back. Story 80. I was driving a plow truck borrowed from the company owner's friend and crashed it 3 hours into plowing. I was told to leave the keys in it and go home. Never plowed snow again. Story 81. When I was hired, it was to start a design department in a large duty-free store. Turned out that the design department was to be just me, and 6 months later, when I'd done a ton of work and caught them up on promotions and implemented brand standards and generally made the whole in-house design process easier, they strolled into my office one day after lunch and let me go. They took advantage of the fact that I was, at the time, a recent college grad and would work hard for less money than a seasoned pro. Damn those idiots. Story 82. I was in high school in NJ looking for a summer job. Got a job selling knives, one of these MLM deals I realized later on. The Italian Guido in the shiny suit was telling a group of us what the job entailed. Don't know why, but I poked fun at him in a well-timed moment. He asked me to the front of the classroom and fired me. Glad I didn't have to sell knives to all my family members. Story 83. When I was a bank teller, I'd previously cashed a money order for $999 for a bank member who was dating the bank's president's niece. And when they came back through to do it again, I became suspicious. Took it to my boss, turned out it was fake, as was the previous one that I had cashed for him. I was fired that day. The guy with the fake cashier's check kept the $999 and continued to date that bank president's niece. No charges for fraudulent cashier's checks or anything. Story 84. I was leaving the company I was at for another one and gave them more than the standard 2-week notice. Har gave the typical, sad to see you go, but thanks for the heads up response, but then came to my workstation an hour later with security. They escorted me out of the building with a you can't quit because you're fired type of attitude. Was a nice month break between gigs though. No complaints, and the company ended up going under and being bought out 6 months later. Story 85. I didn't make enough sales because I was depressed. I found it hard to gel with people and feel motivated. They were a toxic company with very little care for their employees. On the first day of my 3rd month, he fired me. I spiraled into depression. I didn't think I was good enough for any job I applied for, and ultimately I had to move home. I'm back in the city now, 2 years later, but I'll never forget that experience. What's something you saw a coworker do that got them fired on the spot? I was working in a QC lab where one of the tests we did was burn the product to ash to determine the amount of fill put into it. The ovens we used were very hot and dangerous. We used fire-resistant Kevlar gloves and extra-long tongs when placing or removing trays. One of my coworkers couldn't find the right tongs and used a shorter set instead, which meant he had to put his hand inside the oven. His gloved hand caught fire. Another coworker's quick action with a fire blanket and the glove kept him from being seriously injured, but he was fired and the rest of us had to do a refresher safety training. Story 2. He was 3 hours into his first shift as a temp for the factory and decided that it would be fun to see what happened if he hit the emergency stop button on a 15-person line. The line manager even gave him the benefit of the doubt, asking seriously if he had thought there was some emergency or if he'd just gotten overwhelmed on his first day. Nothing wrong with that. But no. Sorry, man, I just thought it would be hilarious. He also tried to steal the pair of safety glasses we had given him when he left. Story 3. A first day training as a bartender at an upscale Irish pub-style bar, guy who is training me tells me to follow him to the secondary cooler to stock. We get to the 3rd floor and he grabs 2 beers and starts chugging one and lays out a line of blow on the bar from a little container. I didn't have a problem with it because, hey, I knew I could relax BC. I wouldn't be damn up as bad as him. Anyways, he drinks both beers and we basically tour the restaurant until we get to the downstairs server well and the 16-year-old hostess keeps flirting with the guy by taking his phone. Fast forward 2 hours and multiple lines later, and we see the hostess again, and dude literally starts beating her saying, "Don't duck with me." The cops come, her parents come. I'm the sole witness. Dude runs upstairs, steals a bottle of Johnny Walker Green Label and runs for it. Had to appear in court over this incident. Story 4. Long time ago, I worked as a software dev for small mom and pop software company, 8 people. As a senior dev, I had told the owners they needed to do some manner of text screen and not just go on, I feel the guy's good. I come in on Monday and they say, this is Doug. We hired him on Friday, bring him up to speed. Me, Doug, we write Photoshop plugins here. You've written plugins, right? Him, blank stare. Me, well, it's like an app, but it has very specific calling format, entry points. You've written an app before, right? Him, blank stare me. We use C++ here. You've written code in C++, right? Him, blank stare. Then, well, I've written a little code in Rascal, but just for this one class, I go back to the owners and go, you hired this guy for a dev position, right? He was gone the next day. He had gone out and had bought a car based on this job. After this episode, they had me do a quick weed-out dev quiz before they brought anyone else in who could BS their way into the job. Story 5. While working in a chain steakhouse, there was one guy who was really doing poorly. Managers suspected him of coming to work high and they were looking for a reason to fire him. He had 2 glasses of tea on his tray ready to take out to his table, but he forgot which glass was sweet tea and which was regular. So, his solutions, while standing directly in front of the general manager, grabbed one of the glasses and took a drink, proclaimed that was the sweet one, set it down and started to take the tray out to the table. I don't know if he was high or just really stupid, but he was fired right on the spot. Story 6. Used to work the slow shift, from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m., at a noodles restaurant once, and we would duck around all the time. Once a coworker was hiding under our boss's desk, who almost never came into the store, to pop out and scare me. Instead, boss comes in, coworker pops out, fired immediately. Story 7. Worked at Walmart as a cashier, and they told all of us the cops were sending in undercovers to try and buy alcohol, so we needed to card everyone because if we sold them alcohol, we would be fired. This sweet little old lady didn't card them and was fired. I felt a little bad for her, but at the same time, they told us way beforehand and she didn't card them, so it was her fault. Story 8. My first job ever was a movie theater, and we had 2 instances of fired on the spot. Now you need to realize that in Minnesota, you can start working at 13, and the neighborhood that this theater is in is higher income. So half the kids there actually want a job, and half the kids were forced to get a job in their parents. Attempt to teach them responsibility. Make them less of a spoiled brat. The hiring process was essentially you fill out an application, and in the interview, confirm that you want a job and don't smell. Very low standards, but it's 13-year-olds. Now, first girl we will call S. S was dumb as a rock, and her ambition in life was to be a trophy wife. She made sure people knew that too. S did not do well with customers in general, and the manager didn't really care for her. She often refused to do jobs she thought were below her, like refill ice or clean. Well, one day S decided it would be hilarious to stick her head under the ice machine and pour it directly into her mouth, in front of the manager and customers. Manager forced her to clean, stood there and watched her scrub the entire machine down, then told her she was fired. She left screaming about how she didn't need this job anyway, how her daddy could buy the theater for her, and all she needed to do was trap some guy with a kid anyway. She was a lovely person. Daddy never did buy her the theater, though. Second was a guy we will call Anger Issues. Anger Issues had clearly seen some crap. His family were immigrants who fled the Soviet Union shortly before it fell, and you always got the impression things just were not right with him. We knew about his family because he would not shut up about it for the whole 3 months he worked there. Anger Issues one day came in, and when it was slow with no customers around, started complaining about how he got suspended from school. He apparently threw a chair through a window and flipped a desk over before threatening to hit a girl because she wouldn't go on a date with him. He went on and on about how it was unfair, how his dad was on his side, and how this idiot should know she had to be his girlfriend. He then concluded this tirade that had 4 other teens staring at him in horror by trying to ask one of the girls on a date. By chance, my best friend, who is not good at confrontation due to having a super abusive birth father. She looked at me for help, and because I have no issue being a git when called for and knew I could defend myself if need be, told him to duck off and leave her alone, then immediately knocked on the door to the manager's office, and we all explained what just went down. He was fired on the spot. Story 9. Working night shift in a bush camp, got up midday, couldn't sleep. Went into the kitchen to grab a bite to eat, heard moaning and shuffling sounds from the cook's quarters through the kitchen. Honestly thought the cook had fallen and was injured. Looked in the door, and he's in his underwear, doing some kind of weird yoga on the floor chanting. I was shocked and creeped out and walked out. Roughly 15 minutes later, I was outside puffing a substances near, and he'd do substances. Cook was caught shooting speed into his arm earlier in the morning and was having a bad trip when I saw him. The bosses were waiting confirmation from head office as to what they should do. The plan they came up with was to tell the EMTs they found him on the floor confused, and they basically threw him in the van and made the EMTs drive him to the hospital and dump him in the ER. It was a different era then. Story 10. Manager opened the door to the walk-in cooler, with me in tow, to see one of the other stock boys chugging a chocolate milk from stock. Good kid, though. Honestly, he was 15 at the time and just did something dumb. I guess we're still vaguely in touch 10 years later. Story 11. Worked at a retail pet store. We had this kid who was rich and spoiled. He would always be talking about whatever party he went to. It was thought for a while he was stealing betta fish and selling them online. Never caught him though, so we couldn't do anything. Then there was this one day when he wanted to go on break. Sure, we can cover for 15 minds. He's acting weird though. He hunts down the main manager to ask when you can ask anyone. And he announces to multiple groups of people, groomers, main manager, another manager, and then the people hanging out in the back who hadn't clocked in yet, that he was going on break. He proceeds to put this large box under his arm, under his jacket. I say that in quotes because his arm was held up in this awkward angle, and you could obviously see this large aquarium box. But I guess since you couldn't see the cardboard, he thought it was hidden. He then goes out the grooming door and to his car. Our manager followed him out. It was fun. Story 12. Worked at a chain restaurant in a high tourist destination where we got a lot of foreigners, military, who are both notoriously bad tippers. When you make $2 an hour serving and get stiffed on tips on an above-average basis, you get a squirt pretty quickly. So one night my buddy was serving this military couple. At the time we had a promotion for booze in a blender. You can probably figure out the restaurant based on this, where you got 2 drinks in this giant plastic blender for $16. We had display models of the blender on each table. So the military couple stiffed him on the tip, and the wife stuffed the blender into her purse. My buddy went into a rage at the 0 tip, chased them out of the restaurant and down the escalator to the busy street, screaming after them that they stole restaurant property. Well, instead of fleeing from their crime, this couple marched back upstairs, demanded to speak with the manager, and told them about my coworker chasing them downstairs. He was fired, and they got to keep the stolen blender. A few months later, I was fired for poor money handling after a guest walked out on a $200 check. Story 13. I can't recall ever seeing somebody literally get fired on the spot, but I've come pretty close. Working the evening shift one evening, it was just me and this one other kid. He left work to go home or somewhere, do who knows what, in the middle of his shift, without giving anybody any prior warning or notice and without punching out. Just hopped in his car and told me he'd be back in about half an hour. My boss just happened to drop by while he was gone. Don't you just love watching instant karma in action? Asked me where he was, and I told him that he left, didn't say where he went, and that he'd be back soon. My boss asked me if I was able to work until closing that night. I was. He called the other kid's cell phone and left a voice message telling him not to bother coming back that night. That was in fact the final straw for him. He'd been on thin ice for a while already. But my boss still had him work one more shift into the new pay week so that he'd have a paycheck to withhold until he got the kids' uniforms and keys back. More recently, we had a kid who was on strike about 5,000 out of 3. Late and no-show multiple times with flimsy excuses. Showing up to work hungover, still drunk from the night before, dressing inappropriately for work, discussing inappropriate things in front of customers, suspected of shoplifting, etc., who one day decided to go around telling everybody how much he was getting paid. I genuinely believe he's just so stupid that it didn't occur to him that discussing pay with your coworkers while you're at work is just a bad idea. My boss didn't find out about this incident until 3 days after it happened, but the kid was fired about 2 minutes after my boss found out that it happened. Apparently, now he goes around town telling everybody that the person who brought this incident to my boss's attention got him fired because she was unhappy with how much money he was making. Story 14. He wasn't a coworker, but my friend worked a Sparrow in our local mall's food court for 6 months or so. He hated it and took every opportunity to slack off and possibly be fired. So one day in the middle of summer, with the food court absolutely packed, these teenage girls asked him for some ice to cool off. Any normal employee would have just filled a couple cups with ice. But my friend goes and gets a giant plastic pitcher, bucket, and fills it to the brim with ice, setting it up on the counter and says, "Here you go." So the girls laugh and ask for cups, but one of them jokingly says, "Will you just dump that on us?" So he grabs the bucket, goes out the back entrance, and around to the front of the counter, and proceeds to not just dump, but throw the entire bucket of ice a good 10 feet all over these girls, sending ice all over the floor and over to the line of people at the Panda Express right next door. Unsurprisingly, he was simply told by his manager, "Go home," and they just never put him on the schedule again. Story 15. Not at my work, but a friend of mine, a sassy you-know-he gay diva type, worked as a selector at some fancy party for celebrities. All went well until they caught him writing down all personal info of those celebrities. Kicked him right out, didn't even finish the evening. He also applied for a job at a model agency. Brought his CV on pink paper sprayed with Channel. I love him. On his first day, they asked him to do quick research on something to see if he was up for the job. He sat down, opened his MacBook, and stared out the window for 20 minutes, and then just stood up, shot his MacBook down, and made a very dramatic exit while saying, "It's impossible to work like that." Till this day, no one knows why is it impossible to work like that, and no one knows what that means. I don't know how this guy manages to still keep going within the same community. Must be the sass. Story 16. I worked some crappy support position in a low-tier call center. One day, I went to assist an agent who had asked for help, and he pulled a knife on me. He was walked out within 20 minutes. Surreal as duck. Story 17. Had a whole new guy come in. So bad my boss was planning on firing him as soon as his 3 months were up. We hired someone new, ducks up 3 orders of expensive fish in a row. Boss tells him to get out, you're done, in the middle of a Friday lunch rush. Idiot comes back in the next morning. He wasn't even supposed to work until the afternoon, and my boss has to literally tell him that he has been fired and he needs to leave and not come back. Story 18. Packer was using a machine that created fillers using large rolls of brown paper. Machine gets stuck and thought it was a good idea to unstuck it by lighting it up. Obvious giant bonfire happens and decides to pour lots of water over the machine that's still powered up. After that, decides to try and fix by sticking his hand into the machine, still powered up, which compacts paper and a slicing mechanism to create the fillers. He ended the Friday without incident, miraculously, and forgot to lock up the warehouse as he left. Didn't see him again on the Monday. Story 19. I don't know if it counts since I was the one doing the firing, but I had an employee who thought it was acceptable to make out with her. So, at the end of the counter, while there were customers in line. Customers, including a former employee, sent me pictures. This was not a quick peck, goodbye kiss, but tongue and groping for more than a minute. So gross. I went to the store, sent her home, and finished her shift. It was not immediate, but almost immediate for another employee. During the 2004 elections, when Bush won his second term, I got a call from one of the guys I had working second shift. Brain called and said that Ken had taken the front page of the newspaper that said in large print, Bush wins, and marked out wins and wrote in sucks and drew horns on Bush, which in itself would not be a fireable thing. But then Ken decides to tape the newspaper to his shirt and is running the register, interacting with customers like that. I sent him home immediately. Less than 10 minutes later, the regional manager calls me at home and asks me about this situation. Apparently, there were numerous complaints, and even the CEO and owner had heard about in that short period of time. At that point, the termination was out of my hands. Ken was a good employee, but young and idealistic. And if the owner says you are fired, you're fired. Story 20. I've got two stories. 1. At my first job as a labor worker at a warehouse for a supermarket brand, someone decided to open a pack of butter he was supposed to stack and throw at a coworker for craps and giggles. Also, we had 3 superiors. 1 for non-food, 1 for food, and 1 for the cooled goods like meat. And one of them were generally toxic, even told me he wanted to fire me one day because I was new and inexperienced. One day there was little work to do, so one of the workers decided to join the other departments to ease the workload. That one superior got pissed and told him he had the day off because there was no work to be done. The other superiors were outraged at that decision and fired their colleague the same day. 2. In the city I live in now, one of my students worked in a supermarket as a cashier, but said he got fired and never understood why. I said, you must have done something they disliked then, when he told me, but he didn't know what that would be. But knowing him, he's very blunt about things, and I guess his attitude was unwelcome at the store. I shopped there yesterday, and now they have an automated message the cashiers can play to call colleagues over speakers that says, "One friendly cashier to the counter, please." Story 21. Last year I was in between studying at 2 different campuses, and my father hooked me up with a friend of his to do demolition. I ended up laboring on this house in the dead center of town, just a standard dismantle and demolish job. Apparently the land was pretty hotly contested, and a lot of people would call in with complaints to try and get the boss in trouble. So, understandably, he was pretty strict on safety protocols and PPE. One particular day, he heads off site and leaves myself and 2 of the apprentices to continue working. We were up to removing the old brick chimneys, and the boss had been very insistent that we work top down, brick by brick, to avoid any accidents. So there I am, down in the front yard, acting as a spotter for pedestrians, when I hear one of the apprentices yell, "Hey, pineapple stickers, watch this!" He proceeds to take a sledgehammer and knock out the foundation of the chimney. The entire thing comes crashing down, sending scaffolding and debris everywhere. When the dust clears, we can see that instead of breaking apart, the chimney has fallen through the floorboards and caved the whole floor in. I never saw that guy again. Story 22. I train dishwashers in a college town, so I usually don't deal with the best and the brightest. I have a lot of stories about the dumb asses we've tried to hire. I think that by far the worst, though, was this one guy. Just imagine the world's biggest stoner. Anyway, the night I'm training him, it's fairly slow, so I tell him that he can text or whatever until we pick back up. Well, instead of texting, he decides that he's going to call someone on his phone. It pisses me off, but finding dishwashers is terrible, and we were desperate, so I decided I would let it slide. About 5 minutes later, we get a late-night bump, and so I motion at him to hang up the phone. He proceeds to wave his finger at me, like the 1 more minute sign. Now I just about lost it at this point when I hear him say, "Yeah, the manager here is damn hot." Admittedly true. I want to bend her over the counter and nut in the pizza dough. Well, unbeknownst to him, our manager had heard him say that. He was gone for so many reasons. Story 23. I work in fast food. We had one 18-year-old girl at our place that was constantly either coming into work hungover or calling in sick after bragging she was going out the night before, due to a management change. I took over from a girl who had gotten pregnant. We let it slide for longer than we should have. Plus, the girl had been friends with the previous manager. I gave her a warning and said the boss would fire her if it continued. She then says, straight to my face, "I dare him to fire me." Like crap, bro. About 2 days later, she comes into work moaning that she's got an abscess on her tooth and has to go home early. She also ordered salt and pepper ribs to eat at home, which, ribs and spicy powder when you've got an abscess? Stick to your lie, bro. The next day, she phones me and asks if I can get her cover, because she's still really sick. No problem. Got her the cover. Flash to 6 hours later, about 10 p.m. She puts about 5 pictures on her Facebook, which she has all of the management team and our boss added on, about how much she enjoyed drinks with her pals. Told her she was fired the next day, and she tried to get her dad to come in and threaten my boss, Lumao. Story 24. A co-worker who had been working with the company for 3 or 4 years asked to leave work early because his wife texted him, letting him know she was leaving him and taking the kids with her to Colorado. Our manager, known to play favorites towards female coworkers, said no because he already let one woman go to take care of her 16-year-old who had a cold. This escalated into an in-front-of-customers shouting match, which culminated in my manager shouting, "If you don't like how I run this place, you can leave." Coworker took off his uniform, threw it in our manager's face, and left. He never came back. Story 25. My brother was fired yesterday. He's a chef at a pub, so can rarely get time off, especially during peak times. Nonetheless, he managed to get the weekend off, so we could go to the racetrack together for an annual Australian motor race. Ooh, Brocky! In his absence, the boss started arguing with one of the barmaids about whether the kitchen had been adequately prepared for the other staff to run while he wasn't there. In particular, whether the pork knuckles had been left out to thaw and whether or not this was important. Barmaid tried to defend him. Results in a big shouting match. Boss tells her to get out and make sure my brother doesn't come back. Plot twist. Barmaid is married to my brother. Boss is her dad. Awkward.